The scripture reading this morning is from the book of John, chapter 12, verses 12 through 15. The next day, the great crowd that had come for the Passover feast heard that Jesus was coming to Jerusalem. So they got palm branches and went out to meet him. They shouted joyfully, "Hosanna! Blessed is the one who comes in the name of our God, the ruler of Israel." Jesus rode in, sitting upon a donkey in accord with Scripture. "Fear not, O people of Zion, your ruler comes to you, sitting on a donkey colt."
Instead of a non-biblical reading this morning, I chose to use a second scripture reading. I sort of missed the days when I would have a Maundy Thursday service. And so this is our standard Maundy Thursday reading, which is from the Gospel of John, chapter 13. It was before the feast of Passover, and Jesus realized that the hour had come for him to pass from this world to Abba God. He had always loved his own in this world, but now he showed how perfect this love was. The devil had already convinced Judas Iscariot, son of Simon, to betray Jesus. So during supper, Jesus, knowing that God had put all things into his own hands and that he had come from God and was returning to God, rose from the table, took off his clothes, and wrapped a towel around his waist. He then poured water into a basin and began to wash the disciples' feet and dry them with the towel that was around his waist. When Jesus came to Simon Peter, Peter said, "Rabbi, you're not going to wash my feet, are you?" Jesus answered, "You don't realize what I'm doing right now, but later you'll understand." Peter replied, "You'll never wash my feet." And Jesus answered, "If I don't wash you, you have no part with me." Simon Peter said to Jesus, "Then, Rabbi, not only my feet, but my hands and my head as well." After washing their feet, Jesus put his clothes back on and returned to the table. He said to them, "Do you understand what I've done for you? You call me teacher and sovereign, and rightly, for so I am. If I then, your teacher and sovereign, have washed your feet, you should wash each other's feet. I have given you an example, that you should do as I have done to you. The truth of the matter is, no subordinate is greater than the superior. No messenger outranks the sender. Once you know all these things, you'll be blessed if you put them into practice." Would you pray with me? Ancient One, as we hear these stories once again, let us not just hear them, see them, experience them from a distance, but let us place ourselves into the stories, that we might know their impact, that we might live their lessons, that we might be transformed by this day and the days to come. May the words of my mouth, the meditations of each of our hearts, be filled with your wisdom and your insight. Amen. So this is the beginning of Holy Week. A week that should challenge us, should knock us out of our complacency, out of our detachment, out of our illusions. If we dare to walk this week, we will each confront life itself. And all that life has to offer us in its unvarnished reality. There is everything that happens this week. I think of the paradoxes that we encounter, and maybe you can help me with them. You know, not only do we have life and death, but we have hope and despair. We have loyalty and we have betrayal. What else do we have? Love and hate. Rich and poor, or power and helplessness. What else? Giving and selfishness.
Famine and feast.
Famine and feast.
Hurts and forgiveness.
Hurts and forgiveness. Peace and war. So much. We have status quo, and we have rebellion. We have passion, and we have fear. We have celebration through poems, and we have mourning in a few days. The entirety of human experience can be experienced in this week. So as we celebrate Palm Sunday, there's been a line from a Christmas song that's been going through my head all week. And now I have to remember it, because now, of course, it would leave my head. We're looking for a king, the new Messiah. Name that tune. There's a new kid in town. And yes, everybody was looking for a new Messiah, and Jesus gave them a new Messiah. But he was a Messiah of contradictions. So we have this wonderful day, this high point, as Diane said, the best day of the week until next Sunday. And it's a festival for Passover. So if you put yourself back there, back into Jerusalem 2,000-ish years ago, Passover was the festival that the Jews celebrated to remember and commemorate and honor the release of the Israelites from slavery in Egypt, right? It was a day of freedom from oppression. And people all over Israel would flock into Jerusalem for this celebration. Thousands and thousands of people. It's like going to Milwaukee for the fireworks on the 3rd of July. You can't find a parking spot, you got to bus in. All these people coming in to celebrate this amazing story and festival. But now what happens, even today, maybe especially today, think about what happens when you have thousands of people coming together. Who also shows up to keep the peace? The police. We have to have a police presence to make sure there's nothing bad that happens with the crowd, right? So we've got thousands of Jews flocking into Jerusalem. Who's also coming in? The Roman, well, eventually. But who's coming in to make sure that peace happens? The Roman army's coming in. So Pilate's coming in from Caesarea with his Roman battalions riding in on their war horses and having a military presence around the city to make sure that peace happens. Now, Jesus was an amazing spiritual leader, right? But he was also extremely politically savvy. So if you're going to have a message that you want to have maximum impact to maximum numbers of people, what better day to have a procession, right? Than when you've got thousands and thousands of people coming into town. And so, great day to stage your procession. And he, too, must have been an awesome marketing person, or he had a guy in his, or a woman in his followers who was a great marketing person because he knew how to hook the people that were there. He didn't just, walk into town on the back of a donkey and hope everybody was going to just happen to have their cloaks and their palm branches. This was a staged rally, a staged procession, where they spread the word that he was going to be riding into town on the foal of a donkey. And why would he do that? Because every good Jew who was there would remember the story, remember the prophecy of Zechariah, that at some point a new king, a new Messiah would ride into town on the foal of a donkey and would be triumphant and victorious, a little humble because riding on the foal of a donkey, and would have the power to bring an end to wars and to get rid of all of the instruments of war. That's what people would be hooked by. I'm thinking that they probably missed the humble piece, though. The humility piece being on the back of the donkey. The majesty was easy to see. And they're crying out, the cloaks were thrown for a king to walk on. So they're crying shouts of, Hosanna, save us. Crying out, Prince of Peace, King of Kings, Lord of Lords, all titles that were used for who? Caesar. Even more than Herod, Caesar. Okay, what do you do if you're the Roman presence and you hear somebody else being hailed as the king, the emperor, the Son of God, the Son of Man, the Prince of Peace? You're not too happy. But those are all of the terms of majesty and putting someone up on a pedestal and the Messiah that they expected him to be. Just like years and years ago they'd been released from slavery in Egypt, so now they were seeing on this, again, this Passover time, it's going to happen again. We're going to be free from this awful taxation of oppression and eminent domain and everything else they were dealing with. But they seemed to miss the fact that Jesus was not the Messiah that they wanted. They missed the most important piece, which was the piece of humility. So each gospel has a different Holy Week story. And I suppose sometimes we wonder, well, then which one's true? Honestly, it doesn't matter. The important thing is how they're trying to help us understand who Jesus was. That's the message of the Gospels, is to tell us who Jesus was and what he was about. And for us, too, to be transformed by those stories. Not to be, holding them at arm's length and going, oh, well, that's a really nice story in the Bible. But for us to put ourselves into them. For them to be relevant for our time here today, for us to say, well, how does this impact me now? How am I supposed to behave? Who am I supposed to be? What's the take-home message? And I'm going to ask you that in a couple of minutes. What's the take-home message today? Because interestingly enough, the Gospel of John has a very fascinating sequence of events. We go from this great procession into Jerusalem with the palms and the cloaks and the majesty and the hail and the Hosanna. And aside from a somewhat cryptic conversation about his upcoming death, the next major event is the foot washing. So he's hooked them with the donkey. But a select few will get the punchline of the washing of the feet. It's one thing to imply humility by riding into town on the foal of a donkey. It's another to actually perform an act of humility that nobody can ignore or misunderstand. And this was a huge act of humility to wash someone else's feet. I know there are some people who have foot fetishes, but really feet are not the most beautiful part of the body. They tend to have bunions and corns and calluses and blisters and be dirty. And so not only was this an act of humility, he probably had to have a strong stomach. This was not a fun thing to do. These folks walked around in sandals and dirt floors and roads all the time. I can't stand to go to bed with dirt between my toes. And all I have to do is jump in a shower or the bathtub, run a little water, towel myself off, They didn't have it so easy. Somebody had to go fetch the water from the well. They had to put it in a basin. And hopefully, if you were lucky, you had servants to do the dirty job. Because you didn't even want to wash your own feet. You were hoping you had some lowly servant to do it. And if it wasn't the lowly servant, you were doing it yourself. So for Jesus to don a towel and to want to wash their feet, do you understand the immensity of that? Think about the person that you respect and revere most in your life. The person where you go, oh my gosh, it's so-and-so. Now picture them washing your feet. You can't do it, can you? And that's exactly what happened. It was a message that they had to get loud and clear. And Peter, of course, God bless Peter, didn't like it very much. Peter said, no way, you washing my feet. And Jesus says, you don't get it. You don't get to be different here. If you want a part of what I'm trying to teach you, if you want a part of really experiencing the divine love, you need to be part of this and part of me. So, of course, Peter still doesn't get it. He says, okay, wash all of me. Yeah, see? Jesus probably laughed at him too, really, in all reality. All right, Peter, come on, here we go. It was an act of amazing humility. And then just in case they didn't get the point, Amanda, you probably do this with your kids, right? Okay, now what did you just hear? Tell me what you just learned. And Jesus says, do you understand what I just did for you? You call me teacher and sovereign, you put me up on this pedestal, but if I, who you've put on this pedestal, can wash your feet, you too can wash anybody else's feet. And that includes people like Judas, people you don't agree with, people you don't like, people you don't respect, people maybe you hate. Everybody. What I've done, Jesus says, you have to do too. Because a leader is no better than anyone else. Have you ever had that happen? Just a small act of humility on the part of somebody else that's made you recognize your shared humanity. That either it was an instance where somebody looked up to you and yet you went, I'm no better than anybody else, I'm right in there with you. Or it's somebody, maybe a perfect stranger, who did something kind for you, humble for you. And how that touched you, because at the end of the day, it's the action that touches us, that transforms our hearts, that melts us just a little bit, so that we're not isolated and set off to the side, but that we're woven into the fabric of life and humanity, that we're one. Let me share a story with you. This is a story about the first Christians in China about the end of the 16th century. So there was a missionary priest who went to China, and he went back up into the mountains, and eventually he went through this mountain pass into a valley, and he found a little tiny farming village, you know, with the terraced mountains and completely isolated from the world. They had no clue what was going on anywhere outside of their little valley. And the priest shared the stories of Jesus with this little community. And pretty soon, some of the villagers came to believe. They'd been so drawn to that message. And those villagers got together and they would read the Bible stories together, listen to the Bible stories, and they'd share communion together, and they'd pray together. And they shared the Eucharist until the priest died, And then after he died, they continued to share the stories from memory and continued to hold their little band together. But the problem was that a lot of the villagers looked on them with suspicion and disgust. They didn't understand them. They thought they were weird. They thought they didn't want anything to do with them. But these people were their friends and their neighbors and their relatives, and they were hurting from the fact that folks were looking down on them. Life was hard. This was a farming village. Every day, folks took their pails of water or their pails on their, strung from poles, and they walked up those terraces from the well in the valley to water their fields. Well, it wasn't too long before that small little band of Christians were relegated to the fields on the very top terraces, the hardest to get to. And they were shunned and isolated and ignored, degraded. There were days when events were so bad in the village that people threw things at them, stones and dung, and they ridiculed them. And finally they got together and they said, it's just too hard. We have to do something. We want these relationships back, but we also want them to know the joy and the freedom that we've experienced coming to hear the stories of Jesus, that we've been transformed by them. And so they would meet and they would pray about them, and finally one day an old woman said, well, I know what we have to do, but you're not going to like it. She said, the spirits told me what to do. Believe me, this wasn't my idea, because I'm not going to like it any more than the rest of you. And they implored her to tell them, we promise we'll have an open mind, just tell us what it is. We'll pray about it, we'll make a decision. And she said, well, we need to rise earlier every morning. And instead of just watering our fields at the top of the terrace mountain, we're going to start at the bottom. And we're going to water all of our neighbors' fields. And they all said, oh, you have got to be kidding us. Really? Seriously? You want us to water the fields of all these people that have been demeaning us and ridiculing us? No way, that's exhausting, demeaning, hard work. They prayed about it, and they took a vote, and not one soul was against it. So they prayed for strength, and they started the next morning. And they got up extra early, and they filled up their buckets, and they started watering the field right next to the well. Of course, the nicest field of the richest person in town. And then they started to work their way up, and by sunrise, they were already halfway exhausted. The people came out, and they saw what they were doing, and people just laughed at them. They laughed at them so hard, they were doubled over, tears streaming out of their eyes, slapping their thighs and going, I'm taking the day off. And so they all went back to bed going, oh, those crazy Christians, you never know what they're going to do next. The next day it was the same thing. And the next day, those folks got up early and they started watering all of the terraces, and they didn't finish until it was long after dark. And on Sunday, they took a day of rest and they collapsed, exhausted from that hard week. The second week started and they started doing it again. This time the villagers showed up and just kind of lined up to watch. There weren't so many harsh words anymore, but they were curious. Why were they doing this? By the end of the week, there was one little 10-year-old boy who decided he would help. And he took a bucket and he helped them carry water up that long, painful hike to help them water their fields. The third week came, and a few more villagers started helping them to water all of the fields. But they didn't work after dark. And yet, week after week, this small group of Christians kept at it, and more people joined them over the weeks and months that came. But it was 6 months before people finally realized that they weren't going to stop. That they were going to keep being helpful and gracious and compassionate and keep watering their fields. That they were going to keep putting their neighbors before themselves and keep helping them and being generous. And it was then that people started to want to know what it was that had transformed them so. And it was then that the rest of the villagers started showing up to hear the stories of Jesus and to pray with them. It was 400 years later that the village was finally discovered again by a small group of missionaries. And by that time, nobody had ever known it any different. They had been Christians all of those years. But they told the missionaries the story of how they got to be there, and they said they called themselves the water carriers. And they defined themselves by the way that they were in community with one another. That for them it was about being there for one's neighbors, carrying water for them, and then offering them the water and the bread of joy and community service. So out of all of this, the palms, the foot washing, the carrying water, what's the take-home message for us? What do you hear? What? That we're all equal. So one of the things Jesus said, wanted to impress upon people, is that we're all the same. We all have sacred worth. I don't care who you are, what you've done, where you've been, we all have sacred worth, period. I'm washing your feet. What else? What? Love. So not only do you have worth, but I extend love to you. As a Christian, we extend love to one another. What else?
Serve each other.
What was it?
Serve each other.
To serve each other. Right. We are not people in isolation. And in that service, what happens? Scott? You get to know each other?
You're vulnerable to each other.
Right, you're vulnerable. You form a connection. And you realize that nobody's much different than you are. And in that connection is strength. In that connection is love and equality and understanding and compassion that we don't get if we hold each other at arm's length. That we don't get unless we touch each other's lives. That we don't get unless we talk to each other, get to know each other, and are willing to go out of our comfort zone sometimes to serve one another. And so that's what I'm going to ask you today. Is not just to sit and hear the stories, but to understand the story by being a part of the story, by participating in the story, and an act of equality, an act of perhaps humility. And I'm not going to ask you to wash each other's feet, but I am going to ask you to wash each other's hands. And so I have 2 hand washing stations. And while the band plays a little music, I'm going to invite you to come through the station. And Shirley, if you would take your spot over there, I'm going to explain how this is done. Julie, would you go with Shirley? Sue, you want to come up here? And I'm going to ask that if you are with somebody and they're, one of you, you'll have to make this distinction. If one of you tends to serve the other one more, the one who serves more is not to do it again right now. The one who is served most is the one who will wash the hands. Because you're going to do this in a line. So, Sue, would you come around? So we'll pour just a little bit of water over the person's hands. It doesn't have to be a lot. And then Shirley and I are going to dry their hands. You do not dry your own hands. I've seen people hand off towels. No, not the point. And then I'm going to hand the towel to Sue, and Shirley's going to hand the towel to Julie, and they are going to do the next people. Oh wait, let's get the band first. Can we, Brenda? Can we do the band first so they can play? Now, Brenda, if you want to go back, and we'll just file up one at a time.